Good morning, afternoon, evening, night, or whatever time of day it is for you. I'm Cinther, and right now I'd like to show you my submission for the 4th Cursed Conlang Circus, the language of Qhuhugwuraho, which more literally translates to the language of the skies. The original speakers of this language were not humans at all, but instead corvids. This is the family of crows, ravens, and so on. These are very intelligent creatures, and some 15,000 years ago they were the builders of one of the most extensive civilizations the world has ever seen. Unfortunately, there was a cataclysm that, while not destroying them, erased their civilization from existence. From what we can gather, this was a rapid and temporary cooling of the planet, not long enough to cause a mass extinction, but enough to cause civilizational collapse. However, their various languages did not die. They were recorded by prehistoric humans and transmitted throughout history by an extensive oral tradition. This language is by far the best preserved. Today, there are no native speakers of any of these corvid languages. However, there exists an overwhelming amount of texts in several forms of media, written, oral, and even some digital databases. The phonology of this language is strange, mostly because human vocal tracts are nothing like that of birds. Birds have syrinxes, while humans have larynxes. To make the problem even worse, these humans did an awful job at emulating the bird's speech, so the language now mostly sounds like the word caw repeated over and over again. There aren't a lot of consonants, as you can see here, because of the numerous phonemes that were merged by human ears. The reasons there are so many allophones is because for many communities it was difficult to pronounce all the uvular sounds. It's also difficult for me, and I'm worried about losing my voice now. Similarly, many of the vowels have merged, leaving a 3-vowel system with no backness or roundedness distinctions. There's phonemic vowel length with long and overlong vowels, and vowels are allophonically rounded after a labialized consonant. Oh, also, everything is creaky voice, but I refuse to write that down for every single time I use the IPA, so just keep that in mind. Somehow, only now does the language get really weird. Nouns and verbs are inflected in the same way for the same categories, and each root's main meaning is verbal, with the nominal meaning being derived from the verbal one. I won't call this a verbless or a nounless language since there are still distinctions in their functions, but the main difference between verbs and nouns is syntactic. Verbs occur at the head of clauses, while everything else is a noun. To start, both nouns and verbs mark for number. Thankfully, this is just a simple distinction between singular and plural. For nouns, this obviously signifies how many of the noun there are. For verbs, this signifies how many times the action happens. A singular number means that it happens just once, while a plural number means that it happens repeatedly. The next category is tense. The language distinguishes 6 tenses: the remote past, the near past, the present, the near future, the remote future, and the gnomic. The gnomic essentially signifying throughout all of time. For verbs, this is just a tense marker, but for nouns it's more complicated. It marks the time that is focused on for the noun. For instance, if you mark a noun with the present tense, you're specifically emphasizing the current state. If you use the near past, you're talking about its state in the recent past, and so on. This was something that took even myself a while to wrap my head around. However, to everyone's dismay, we are not done with tense yet. Each word takes not one, but 2 tenses, one from the point of view of the speaker, and the other from the listener's point of view. The reasons for this are a bit unclear, but the leading theory is that since the corvids had the ability to speak to and receive messages from people from the past and from the future, this system originated as a way to orient oneself and one's partner in conversation in time. Thankfully, to make the language slightly less verbose, nouns inherit their tense from the parent verb, and verbs in a subordinate clause also inherit their tense from the parent verb, unless either of them are explicitly marked with a tense marker. Therefore, tenses are only obligatory on the main verb of a sentence. An important safety note for those unaware, we've received reports that a few people now, many unrelated to the study of corvid society, have in fact been receiving messages blaming them for the collapse of corvid civilization. In the unlikely event that you receive a message, since you can't respond, you should try to remain calm and retain your rationality. So here, if we take a look at the slide, we can see there are 2 timelines extending infinitely from the past and to the future. The yellow one, or the top one, is that of the speaker, while the blue one, the bottom one, is that of the listener. Both of these timelines are oriented around 3 points in time: the boundary between the remote and near past, the present, and the boundary between the near and remote future. These points in time are very, very fluid and can change depending on the context, the time scales in question, the experience of the flow of time itself, etc. In fact, it's relatively easy to construct a sentence where 2 weeks ago is marked with the remote past, and simultaneously 100 million years ago marked with the near past, where those two actually make sense in context. These 3 divisions divide each timeline into 5 sections, which are the 5 tenses I mentioned earlier, with the remote past and the remote future extending into eternity. I'll get back into the nomic soon. Speakers of Qhuhugwuraho will need to consider the contexts of every noun or verb and the timelines of both themselves and their partners in conversation. Needless to say, it's difficult for those not used to it. In the next few examples, we're talking about a cat. Here specifically, the cat is marked for my present and your near past, because you are in my future and I'm in your past. So the discourse is in general about the cat, but we're putting focus on the cat state in what is the present for me and sometime recently for you. And in this one, we're talking about the state of the cat which was sometime in the near past for the both of us. And here, the hypothetical future state of the cat, which would be soon for you, but quite far in the future for me. Here, the irrealis mood is used, because this is just imagined for everyone in the conversation, and no one can really be certain yet if it's real or not. The nomic is really weird. Here, we aren't zooming in on any specific moment in time. Instead, we're looking at the cat's collective existence, how it existed in the past, as an embryo, a kitten, as an adult cat in the present, and then even farther into the future. If you look at the gloss, you see that this only takes one tense because it will necessarily be the nomic for both the speaker and the listener. More literally, this could be translated as the cat as a whole, as it has always existed. For a verb, this signifies something occurring across all time, either once continuously or repeatedly if the plural is used. This is the most general tense with the broadest meaning and by far the most confusing. Anyway, on to a simpler topic, mood. This is just a simple distinction between realis and irrealis. The realis is used for anything being said as known or as a fact, while the irrealis is used for anything hypothetical, imagined, or unknown. The realis is the default unless a first-person future tense is used, in which case the irrealis is the default and the realis is marked. Unlike in any human languages, a realis future is a construction that actually exists. This can be used, for instance, if you're told something by an informant from the future, or if you're just overconfident that something is going to happen. So if we put everything together, we have 27 combinations of tenses, 2 moods, and 2 numbers. That comes out to 108 combined suffixes. Gratefully, these are partially agglutinative, so you don't need to memorize 108 different affixes to speak properly. Directly after the stem is the mood marker. The choice of marker, as previously mentioned, is dependent on the tense for the speaker. If a future tense is used, then use the second column, otherwise use the first column. After that is the marker for the tenses. There are 26 of these, and they're fusional with no pattern. 25 for the combinations of the 5 basic tenses, and 1 for the nomic. You can also have no tense marker, indicating that the word inherits its parent verb's tense. Finally, there's number. You just put the suffix if it's plural and don't add anything if it's singular. It's genuinely that simple. To tie everything here together, I'll provide a simple example directly from one of the last known texts written by Corvid. Well, I call it simple, but it's really not. This sentence means roughly, because of a purple owl, it's snowing so much everywhere. However, there are several nuances here to note. The word meaning purple is not in fact an adjective, but an adverb modifying the verb to be an owl. A more literal, if slightly stilted translation of the phrase would be, there was a purpley owl. All uses of adjectives in English are instead covered by adverbs and verbs. A sentence like, the ball is red, where you would normally use the copula, is literally, the ball red. The word translating to owl takes the near past for the speaker and the remote past for the listener. This would signify that we are ignoring their present or future state and simply focusing on what they did in the past to cause the snow. Furthermore, the use of the realis mood implies that this owl is real, not an imagined character or a made-up scapegoat. The word everything doesn't take a tense marker, so it simply takes its parent verb's tense, which here is the speaker's present and the listener's remote future. Subtly, the use of the singular number for the verb implies that the snowing is continuous, and not a repeated or a fluctuating event. Finally, the use of the second person remote future is hinting towards some amount of recognition that this writing will only be seen far in the future, well after this ever happened. Everything else isn't incredibly interesting, so I'll just speedrun it. The syntax is consistently head final, the word order is SOV, adjectives, adverbs, and relative clauses all go before what they describe, and speaking of adjectives, as I talked about earlier, they're just verbs or adverbs in a trench code. Many postpositions can also take both verbs and nouns, with the difference only being communicated through prosody and context. For instance, the postposition meaning at can mean while as well. There's a lot of affixing happening, negatives are marked with a prefix, and most derivation uses suffixes. There are also many verbs stemming from reduplication in the lexicon, but the meanings have shifted so much that most of them are essentially unrecognizable. One of the most interesting things about this language is that it is most common to sing it, accompanying it with melodies and birdsong. Even among the native Corvids, many texts show that song and poetry were heavily intertwined with the use of the language, and the humans adopting the language continued this tradition. Needless to say, I'll be breaking with tradition when I recite the translation. Well, the translation itself wasn't too hard to make, but God willing, my uvula doesn't fall off after this. Oh my god, it's finally over. Thank you for watching, or should I say, So if you're interested in seeing more cursed conlangs, I highly recommend watching the other CCC4 entries. They're terrifying, and at the same time they're amazing. I'm actually planning on making a video on 17 EDO Harmony at some point, if you know what that is. So I'll see you all next time I upload, whenever on earth that might be. Bye.